CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. Ukraine says it shot down all 36 drones launched by Russia overnight in the latest attack on the capital, Kyiv. Meanwhile, Russia's Wagner mercenary group says it's withdrawn from Bakhmut, but Ukraine maintains it still controls part of the city. Our other headlines: UK migration hits a record high, piling pressure on Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who promised to cut the numbers. And be prepared to evacuate. Thousands of people near Mexico City are put on alert as this volcano spews lava and ash. Ukraine says it shot down all 36 drones launched by Russia overnight in the latest attack on the capital, Kyiv.
Yes, contact!
President Volodymyr Zelensky said it had been an uneasy night, but commended the work of air defences. Ukrainian officials say the drones were likely trying to target critical infrastructure and military facilities. It's Moscow's 12th attack on Kyiv this month. Well, the head of Russia's Wagner mercenary group says its forces are withdrawing from Ukraine's battleground city of Bakhmut. Kyiv says the Wagner fighters are being replaced with regular Russian troops in the outskirts, but the mercenaries remain inside the city. Let's talk to our correspondent, Stuart Smith, in Moscow. Stuart, tell us more about this announcement from the Wagner group.
Yeah, well, from here in Moscow, the statements coming out from the head of the Wagner Group, such as Yevgeny Prigozhin, as well as the Russian Ministry of Defense, mostly overlap with what Ukraine is saying here. Prigozhin says that his forces are going to leave the city, most of them, by the end of the month. He said some of them will be kept in the city just in case there are problems that the Russian Ministry of Defense can't deal with and it needs support, but most of them will be rebased near the rear lines of the so-called special military operation. Now, Prigozhin says that this is all due to happen by the end of the month and has suggested that they will be still instrumental in the so-called special military operation, but it seems over the next few weeks at least, we may be hearing less about what Wagner troops are doing on the front lines of Ukraine.
Meanwhile, Russia has summoned the envoys of a number of countries, amongst them Germany, Denmark and Sweden. What more do we know about this?
Yeah, those three countries, very important for Russia's complaint, which is that the investigation of the Nord Stream 2 and Nord Stream 1 sabotage is not progressing quickly enough. Now, it's Sweden and Denmark, together with Germany, investigating what exactly happened. Russia says there's been a complete lack of results, and the Russian Foreign Ministry is urging these countries to speed up, but at the same time accusing them of deliberately undermining the investigation, saying that they are trying to conceal the true perpetrators of the blast. Russia has been frustrated throughout this investigation that it is not being included in attempts to find evidence, and you may recall there have been numerous various media reports about who and who is not to blame. The official stance from here in Moscow is that, quote, well-known Western countries are responsible, but neither, for example, the United States, nor Russia, nor, in fact, Germany, Sweden and Denmark have provided evidence that would be conclusively seen as suggesting who is behind this yet. So the investigation from the European point of view continues.
Stuart, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Stuart Smith, in Moscow. Well, let's talk now to Mark Cancian, retired US Marine Colonel and Senior Advisor at Washington Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mark, welcome back. We're just reporting on the latest chapter in the battle for Bakhmut, increasingly a focus of this war. Why is Bakhmut so important?
Bakhmut achieved an importance because there was so much focus on it. The Russians have been attacking there really for 6 or 7 months. The Ukrainian troops were quite exposed. They were in a salient. The Russians were trying to pinch that off. If they had succeeded, it would have been a major success. They failed. But then after months and months of attacks, both sides were pouring in troops, and the city got a significance beyond its strategic value, like Verdun in the First World War or Stalingrad in the Second World War. It became a symbol of resistance and of attack.
Ukraine says it shot down all 36 drones launched by Russia overnight. Why has Moscow intensified its air campaign on Kyiv?
I think Moscow is trying to put pressure on the government and the people in advance of the counteroffensive that's widely expected. They're trying to discourage Ukraine from the counteroffensive, maybe undermine some of the civilian morale. Their attacks on the infrastructure were gaining some traction, but then the Ukrainians were able to mitigate that damage. So this is a new phase of the Russian air attack.
In terms of the wider Russian campaign, what insights can we gather when it comes to the events of the last few days? Where are we on the Russian campaign?
Well, the Battle of Bakhmut is over. The Russians have run out of combat power. We just heard that Wagner's pulling its forces back. There are small attacks by the Ukrainians, which have been important just because the Ukrainians have been able to go over the offensive, but this is not their counteroffensive. Emphasis now shifts to the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which is widely expected. The Ukrainians have built 8 or 9 brigades with the equipment supplied from NATO and the West. When they launch those, it'll be an important step in the war. The hope is that they will be able to have a major success, recapture significant territory. They won't be able to drive the Russians out of all of the occupied territory, but the hope is that they will make a significant step towards doing that.
Mark, when we first started talking all those months ago, and we've talked every few weeks about this war, we kept on referring to a spring offensive. Well, we're in June next week. What is the significance of this offensive not happening in the spring? Does it make any difference these days in modern warfare?
It doesn't really make a difference. The longer the timeline goes on, the more equipment and more training that the Ukrainians have. At some point, there's going to be some discomfort about delay. I mean, the Ukrainian people will start getting anxious, and supporters in the West will start getting anxious. You're going to start seeing some criticism of Ukraine. But in the near term, the Ukrainians are getting stronger. Now, the flip side is that the Russians are also digging in. So both sides are getting stronger. It's likely the Ukrainians are progressing at a greater rate, but say they can't delay too long, or their people and their supporters are going to get anxious.
We talked about Russian tactics earlier on. Let me ask you about the wider picture of the war. How far are we into this? I mean, are we simply at the beginning or at the beginning of the end? How do you see this?
Well, we're likely in the middle. You know, there was the initial offensive phase by the Russians, and there's been this long stalemate, battle of attrition. Both sides have had great losses, but the front lines haven't moved a whole lot. The Ukrainians did have some success back in the fall, but not since then. The next big event is going to be this counteroffensive, and that will give us an indication about what the rest of the war looks like. If it's successful, then it may be the first step on a road towards Ukrainian victory. If it fails, if it gets hung up on the Russian front lines, then we're looking at maybe a different outcome of the war, maybe something negotiated.
Mark, good to see you again. Thanks for coming on the programme. Mark Cancian, US Marine Colonel and Senior Advisor at Washington Center for Strategic and International Studies. Well, the sun is shining on solar investment, which is expected to overtake global spending on oil production for the first time ever this year. The International Energy Agency says annual investment in clean energy is projected to have risen by nearly 25% from 2021, outstripping the 15% rise in fossil fuel projects. But the IAE warned that investment in hydrocarbons will need to fall even faster to achieve net zero emissions by the year 2050. Iran says it successfully test-launched a ballistic missile with a potential range of more than 1,000 miles. It's capable of reaching Israeli and US bases in the Middle East. Earlier this week, the head of Israel's armed forces raised the prospect of action against Tehran over its nuclear program. Australian firefighters have contained a huge blaze at an abandoned factory in Sydney. Hundreds of people were moved from their homes as the fire spread, but no casualties have yet been reported. Our correspondent Nicole Ng reports.
Dramatic scenes here in the heart of Sydney. This 7-story building behind me completely consumed by flames, with chunks of the front and side walls crumbling away, crashing down onto the street. Fire authorities say that they believe the two main impacted buildings had been vacant at the time, but smaller fires did spread to nearby buildings, some residential, meaning evacuations. They say over 100 firefighters and 20 fire trucks have been deployed to the scene to battle what has been described as an incredibly intense fire. They say it has now been brought under control, but they expect to work throughout the night to extinguish it completely. Now, the exact cause of this inferno is not yet known, but this was an old building with timber floors and beams, and that certainly helped accelerate the speed at which it burned. Authorities are advising people to stay away from the area. There is still smoke in the air, but this location is less than a block away from the main train station of Sydney, and the blaze did get underway in the late afternoon, just as peak hour was beginning. And so plenty of people around, plenty of witnesses, people filming while they waited on the platform for their train even. So plenty of interest tonight on this blaze, and plenty of videos circulating on social media at this point.
Nicole reporting from Sydney. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, more people are moving to the UK than ever before, despite government promises to slash the numbers.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Ukraine says it shot down all 36 drones launched by Russia overnight in the latest attack on the capital, Kyiv. Meanwhile, Russia's Wagner mercenary group says it's withdrawn from the city of Bakhmut, but Ukraine maintains it still controls parts of the city. Now, more people are moving to the UK than ever before. New figures show net migration last year hit a new record high of 606,000 people. The numbers have been pushed up largely by people from non-EU countries. It all adds pressure on Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his government, who promised to cut migration. Well, our correspondent Lee Jianhua is following the story. Well, the Brexit campaign, if I remember rightly, promised to take back control of UK borders. Doesn't seem to be working, does it?
Yeah, you're right. That looks really bad for Brexiters like Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman, who thought that they could take back control of the UK borders, but apparently not. And Brexit campaigner Nigel Farage said that this number is a total breach of trust between voters and the government. Those are some strong words. Before Brexit, we look at the average net immigration figure that was around between 200,000 to 250,000. Now it is around 600,000. So who came? That's the question. International students and workers, and also refugee seekers. And unsurprisingly, if we look at the number from outside the EU, and we see rising numbers, including those from Ukraine and Hong Kong. And for Ukrainian refugees, the number stood at around 114,000. For Hong Kong, that was 52,000. And let's not forget, over 170,000 people are still on the waiting list. They are waiting for the UK government to decide if they can come in or not. If they come in, that means the number will be higher. As Suella Braverman has vowed to reduce overall migration to tens of thousands. That is pretty ambitious, I have to say.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has said the numbers are too high, and he's promised to cut the numbers of people arriving in the UK. Realistically, can he or any government do that?
He said many numbers are too high. Remember, he also said inflation rate number was too high, but now, in April, it was around 8.7%, but now this legal immigration or migration is too high. So during the Prime Minister's questions yesterday, and we saw the blaming game between Labour's and Conservatives, and Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, said he questioned Rishi Sunak's abilities to control immigration. How many visas, work visas, did the UK government issue? It was around 250,000. And Rishi Sunak fired back, saying that Starmer had nothing to contribute. So it seems like none of the governments, I mean, even if Labour takes power in 2024, seems like there is no way out. And Starmer didn't have a specific number, how many migrants would come to the UK. So it is not a UK issue. We don't say it's a problem. It's a world issue. It is in the United States, in Canada, in many other countries, European countries. So Socrates once said, I am not an Athenian nor a Greek. I am a citizen of the world. So ever since globalization gains traction, the citizen of the world has become more and more popular, but now it's getting more difficult. So if we look at illegal migration to the UK, so they would argue, some of them would argue that nobody builds new homes. Who would create new jobs for the immigrants and build schools and hospitals for them? There's a lot of pressure on public services and also housing supplies and the ability of the government to integrate new arrivals. But on the other hand, what can they contribute? I mean, all of the immigrants they can fill vacancies. We see vacancies of doctors, junior doctors. They have been striking, and many of them have migrated out of the UK to Australia, to some other countries. So we do need immigrants and pension for senior citizens. If we look at the latest census in 2021, the population of those aged over 65 stood at around 19% of the population. And also economic benefits, and we know that international students are contributing a lot to the UK economy.
Li Jianhua, thank you very much. Germany is now in recession. It's official. Revised figures show that Europe's largest economy shrank by 0.3% in the first quarter of 2023, with high prices taking a bigger toll than originally estimated. Let's talk to our correspondent Peter Oliver, watching events for us in Berlin. Peter, so a technical recession, that's how some are spinning it in Germany. How bad is it? I mean, are the economic alarm bells ringing there?
Well, yes, a technical recession is how it's been tried to be portrayed by some, but it is a recession. It is 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. The figures that have been put out by the German Statistics Office, they've gone back to those numbers from the final quarter of 2022 and shown that the German economy contracted by 0.5%, and they've revisited the figures from the beginning of this year, where initially they thought the German economy had stagnated at 0 growth, well, it actually contracted by 0.3%. Now, what that means is, yes, we're in a recession here in Germany. We've heard from Christian Lindner, the finance minister, saying he's describing these figures as sending a surprisingly negative signal. And in fact, looking ahead to this weekend, where Germans are particularly gripped by the upcoming Bundesliga title contest that's going to be decided, he opted for a footballing comparison, saying he didn't like to see Germany play in a league in which we are relegating ourselves to the last two positions. He was talking about what the IMF has had to say about both the German and British economies. Essentially, the IMF saying that those two are the only two main European economies facing recession in 2023. It is inflation that is done for the German economy. It stood at 7.2% in April of this year, and what we have seen is it driving down household spending quarter on quarter by 1.2% on the last quarter, and government spending down even more by almost 5%, 4.9% it was stood at quarter on quarter last time around as well. That's inflation that's been doing the damage there. So ultimately, you can call it a technical recession if you want, but if it, well, drives down consecutive growth, if it affects the currency markets as it had done, putting the euro at a 3-month low against the dollar, and if it lowers household spending the way it has done, well, it's a recession.
Peter, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Peter Oliver, in Berlin. South Korea has the lowest birth rate in the world. Its government has been trying to encourage more people to have children, with officials warning of a looming demographic and economic disaster as the country's population ages. Our correspondent Suma New reports.
It's been 10 years since South Korea's fertility rate, the number of babies born to a woman in her reproductive years, went down to below 1.1. And the latest figure stands at 0.78, and further decline is forecast in the short term to 0.7 according to Statistics Korea. This couple is preparing to get married next year. One of the primary reasons of making that crucial life decision was that they were on the same page to not have kids. This couple's decision is not solely based on financial concerns.
In this cutthroat, competitive society, we have to pay attention to education, and I don't know, is this the kind of environment the baby will be happy to live in?
High education levels and career opportunities for South Korean females conflict with heavy family duties, also imposing downward pressure on the fertility rate. To decelerate the drop in the fertility rate, the current Yoon Suk-yeol administration has drafted wide-ranging policy that include increasing stipend given to parents with a child of up to 1-year-old to 1 million Korean won or $765 by 2024.
The largest proportion was allocated to housing-related policy, about 46%. The second largest was child care support policies, and then cash-based support such as child allowances.
Experts voiced the need to adopt a bird's-eye view, not short-term policy directives aimed at seeing a temporary rebound in the birth rate. For that, the nation has to look at this as a 5 to 10-year project, as it's people's perception that has to be changed.
Pushing forward the time frames of life major events like marriage, childbirth, earlier than now could be one solution. In the long run, mainly aiming to improve the birth rate with patience and persistence, and even considering immigration in the short term.
Well, the time is ticking in South Korea, which is why a lot of experts are saying the country needs a long-term blueprint for its population policy. And the blueprint, experts say, will need to be shaped by taking the unique situation of the country, at the same time adjusting to the global trend of shrinking and aging population. Yusumin, CGTN, Seoul.
A caretaker prime minister has been sworn in Greece ahead of an election rerun next month. The country's president has appointed Yanis Samas, a senior judge, to temporarily take charge of the country. None of the major parties won an outright majority in Sunday's vote, while the ruling New Democracy Party, which topped the poll, declined to form a coalition. A manhunt is underway in the Japanese city of Nakano after a woman and 2 police officers were killed in a shooting and a stabbing incident. The police say the suspect, a man in his 30s, is believed to be barricaded inside a building. A 4th person was injured in the incident. Police have told residents near the scene to stay indoors. Security guards at London's Heathrow Airport have begun a 3-day strike. It's the latest walkout over pay at Europe's busiest airport. Heathrow says no flights will be cancelled because of the walkout, which coincides with a mid-term school holiday. People living near a huge volcano in Mexico are being told to be ready to leave their homes. Popocatépetl is just 72 kilometers from the capital. It's been spewing lava and ash for days, forcing the closure of airports and roads. Our correspondent Frank Contreras reports.
The giant Popocatépetl volcano stands over 5,400 meters tall, nearly 18,000 feet. Eruptions are sending volcanic ash and rocks high into the sky and threatening hundreds of thousands of nearby local residents. State rescue teams are on standby. Officials have blocked roads leading to the volcano. In case of an emergency, evacuation routes are clearly marked. The closest village to the volcano is Santiago Xanincintla, population a little over 2,000. Mexican army troops offer them health care, and they've been sweeping up volcanic ash from the streets.
We are sweeping up and using the ashes to fertilize gardens here. The Secretary of Public Health says no one should breathe this because the minerals are irritants. Volcanic ash is a suspended minerals particle produced inside the volcano.
Despite the danger, a few blocks away, local people are celebrating their most important festival of the year, a change in local leadership, and the feast day of their patron saint.
This annual celebration is so important to these people that it's going to take place no matter what.
This tradition has been passed down for generations.
It's important because it takes place one time each year. It comes from our fathers, their fathers, and their grandparents.
Many of these people were in the village in the year 2000, when the volcano was also very active and dangerous. Back then, the government requested they evacuate. But most of the villagers stayed. People here say they're used to volcanic activity. For them, it's just a part of life. Frank Contreras, CGTN, Santiago Xanincintla, Mexico.
The headlines again. Ukraine says it shot down all 36 drones launched by Russia overnight in the latest attack on the capital, Kyiv. Meanwhile, Russia's Wagner mercenary group says it's withdrawn from Bakhmut, but Ukraine maintains it still controls parts of the city. Our other headlines: UK migration hits a record high, piling pressure on Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who promised to cut the numbers. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel, on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.